here's what you need to be thinking about. All right, for paper number 4, what you should be doing is essentially taking a similar conceptual approach that you took to paper 2. All right, so with paper 2, you know that you're comparing treatment options. So if you wanted to use paper 2 as a mechanism to begin, your investigation, great, go ahead and do that. Just what you might find out is that once you get deeper into the research, you may discover that paper 2, might not be a good topic to be working with. Maybe it's not kind of the paper that, or the subject that's actually going to, lend itself to a good research argument. Or maybe you're going to find that there's better treatment options out there that you probably should be looking at instead of the ones that you're currently looking at. So be willing to throw paper 2 out. It's my advice to you, right? If it's not going to work out for you. If it does work out for you, great. Well, then, you can salvage what's there. The problem that a lot of people have with paper number 2 is that they tend to forget where some of the information that came from, where that information came from that was borrowed. So one of the things I would just caution you about is to make sure that, even though I told you in paper number 2, you can only use one article for this side, one article for that side, you're writing an introduction where some of that information might need to be cited, and you need to go back through your, parts of your paper and need to kind of reinvestigate the whole citation process, right? So we're going to be having conversations over the next couple of weeks about how to cite appropriately, how to avoid plagiarism and those kind of things, right? So don't hold up paper 2 as some kind of, root form of the paper that you're going to be writing, because paper number 4 is going to be bigger, right? And then what I mean by that, and we need to kind of talk about the conceptual model for paper number 4. And I just want to throw this, something up like this. All right, so obviously you're going to have an introduction. And in that introduction, what I need you to do is I need you to establish why the 2 treatment options that you've chosen are relevant to the topic. All right, so in other words, you're asking the question, right? What are the 2 treatment options? I mean, you're not just going to pick 2 treatment options out of the sky, right? You need to pick 2 treatment options that are essentially the primary treatment options for this condition that you're dealing with, right? So there's got to be some justification that you're ending up here for a reason. So that introduction might get kind of long for some of you, right? If you've got a garden variety condition that has various treatment options, right, and at different levels, so you're going to need to establish what level of treatment that you're operating on, and you're going to have to establish that, hey, you know what, there's all these other treatment options out here, and this is the reason why these are going to be excluded. Which that's going to mean that you're going to have to kind of plow through some of the research out there to, on those other treatment options to exclude them from the conversation, right? This introduction needs to get to a point where you're saying, all right, I've got these 2 treatment options because these are the best 2. So it's going to take some research on your end to get to that point. And then again, right, once you establish those 2 treatment options, right, you're establishing, you're asking the question, why am I getting to these 2, right? Because you're excluding those that aren't, contributory in any way. And then you're going to get to that operational definition. Now, again, when you change your treatment options or when you change your perspective on this, right, you might end up changing your operational definition from what you did on paper number 2. And that's reasonable, right? The more research you do, the more you find out, the more you know about your subject matter, the more your position might change. Right, so you might end up just kind of reinventing that operational definition, which would be good, right? You need to be doing that. And then, obviously, you get to that thesis statement. Now, that's the introduction, and that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty easy. It's something that I think all of us would expect for an assignment like this. What is going to be challenging is this next part of the body of the paper. What you need to do is you need to create the same principle that you created in paper number 2, which is that you've got your criteria let's call them A, B, and C up here in your operational definition, you're going to need a paragraph about criterion A, right? And you're going to need to show the two treatment options about criterion A, and you're going to, have that intellectual conversation about what treatment is better given the evidence. Well, this is going to put you into a really kind of a difficult situation, because now what you have to do is you have to look at all the treatment options or you have to look at treatment option 1 and treatment option 2, and you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to find all the research you can about that issue, right? Whatever that criterion is for that particular treatment option. And you're going to go out there and find all the research you can for all of treatment 2 as well. And essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to summarize those sources. In other words, you're going to want to say, here's a paragraph about this source, here's a paragraph about this source, here's a paragraph about this source. And I will tell you right now, that will not be accepted, right? Because I don't want to read paragraph summaries of your source material. I want to read, this is the key term you're going to have to get used to, right? You're going to have to synthesize this information down, right? And have a conversation about all the different sources, how they relate to each other, right? This is the key, right? How these sources relate to each other, which ones are the stronger ones, which ones are the weaker ones. Essentially, when we have the conversation about what is an evidence base, right? We hold up some sources as being stronger than others, but the weak sources have a contribution as well, right? So essentially what we want to be able to do is, when we talk about an evidence base, we don't talk about that we have evidence for this. In other words, we have a study that shows that treatment A is better than treatment B. And by the way, you're going to go get your hands on everything now, right? Before, when we wrote paper 2, we limited our searches to those sources that just had studies, right? Now you're going to be finding those comparative studies, those summary studies. You're going to be finding, studies where you're actually going to see the two treatments compared in the study itself. You're going to see those what we call, they're almost reviews, right? They're analyses of the literature, right? That's already been published. In other words, somebody's doing the job that you're doing. They're evaluating the resources themselves and going through and making their own judgments about this. So you want to put your hands on everything you can possibly put your hands on in order to make this argument. But the point is that certain sources are going to be more valid and more valuable to your argument than others. So you want to emphasize the strong ones. You still want to make a point about the weak ones, but you don't want to spend much time there, right? You want to say, look, we've got, maybe there's a case study out there, and we know that case studies are weak evidence, right? There's one example. It's still part of the evidence base, though. So you want to be able to say, all right, we've got this study, and this one, was showing that there was evidence here, but this study here has more patients, more control, more validity and reliability to it. So spend some time talking about what this one means. The key to this whole thing is that you are writing a paragraph about the evidence base. You are not writing a paragraph that summarizes one study and then summarizes another study and summarizes another study. If you do that, I'm drawing a line across the paper, putting an F on it, and hand it back to you, right? I'm not reading it. So your job is not to just summarize studies. I know you can summarize studies, right? You didn't get this far in your academic career without being able to do that very simple academic task, right? We need you to operate at a higher intellectual plane, which is take that research, synthesize it down, boil it down, and tell me what the evidence is from a broader perspective. Tell me what kind of validity it's got, what kind of reliability it's got, what kind of applicability to your operational definition it's got, and look at all of that research kind of in a paragraph and get to the point that this either meets your standard or it doesn't meet your standard. This one meets your standard or it doesn't meet your standard, so that you can make the point that one is better than two, right? If you find yourself writing long summaries of the sources, great. Put that in your notebook. Pin it up on your bulletin board or something. right? But don't put it in this paper. I would strongly suggest that you go to that matrix model that we talked about before, right? And let me just continue on. I'm going to put the word matrix over here on the side. All right, but you're going to do the same thing for criterion A, and you're going to do it in criterion B, you're going to do it in criterion C, and whatever else you've got, and you're just going to keep finding all the research you can. You're going to find that some sources are going to pop up in different areas here, right? So something that you talk about in this section of your paper, right? The same source might pop up in this section of your paper, which is fine, right? Because you're not talking about the sources in general, you're not summarizing the sources, you're talking about how the sources contribute to this argument right here. I'm making a point about pain. So if I'm arguing about pain, I need you to find the resources that are out there that are contributing to something about pain. Get out there and find as much as you can. And somebody will say, well, how many sources is enough? And I'm going to say, I don't know. Do your job. Right? Go out there and find everything. That's what you should be doing. Yep.
So, just to clarify, are you saying like if in paragraph A we're talking about pain, we shouldn't use that source again?
No, you use that source again wherever it needs to be applied.
As long as it.
Yeah, I'm just saying you're not going to go through and tell me about pain, range of motion, and everything else about this source in this section of your paper right here, because this is your section of your paper about pain.
Okay.
All right. So that will essentially, I'm trying to send the message to you that discussing the entire article is not appropriate, right? You want to boil this stuff down. You want to kind of synthesize it. And the key thing here in synthesizing, in order to make transition, so you're going to be talking about several sources in one paragraph, right? You're going to have treatment 1, and you're going to have all these sources that are contributing. How do you make sense of writing a paragraph about all these different sources if they're all doing different things and coming in different, coming up with different evidence? So one of the things that you're going to need to do in order to provide those transitions and that coherence is that you're going to have to show how the sources correlate with each other. All right, how do they relate? So if you could show those correlations, in other words, hey, Jones and Smith did it this way, and they found this. Smith did it this way, and he found that. What does that mean? Right? So now you're in a position where you're going to have conversations about how these studies are working with each other in order to build that evidence base. Sometimes you're going to find that some studies aren't going to be able to contribute at all. They're going to be pretty weak, but then you're going to find other studies that will be able to contribute. What you need to do is to get organized, right? You need to know what you're doing going in. A lot of people run right to the libraries, just start grabbing sources, and that's not the way to do it. I mean, what you need to do is you need to know what you're looking for with each of these articles. So my suggestion to you, and obviously then you'll have a conclusion to this paper as well at the end, but in the conclusion we'll just summarize those main points. So you could, and I would even suggest this, I would probably break this up these into separate sections of your paper, maybe with subheadings, right? So you're going to have an introduction to your paper, and then you're going to have a section on range of motion, and then put the little subtitle in there, and then have that conversation. And then what you need to be able to do, though, and this is how people get confused on this as well, is you need to be focused on the criteria for your operational definition. So you're trying to take all this information to determine whether the evidence base is strong enough to say that, yes, we're meeting the operational definition standards. But you also have to make sure that you're doing the comparison as well, right? You're holding those pieces of evidence up against the evidence from the other treatment option, right? So it's not just showing that either this does or does not meet the standard. It's this one meets the standard, does this one meet the standard, and there needs to be some kind of comparison going on in this as well. So you may find yourself in each of these subcategories kind of writing 3 paragraphs. In other words, here's the evidence for treatment 1, here's the evidence for treatment 2, and then here's the main argument for this. If there's a lot of research. If there's not a lot of research, then it might just boil down to, here's a paragraph that's just comparing the two treatment options. Because we don't have a whole lot of research in order to build an evidence base out of. Maybe we're just building a small base here because the research is young on it. And so because you don't have a whole lot of research, you might end up with just one paragraph that just shows, here's the evidence for this one, here's the evidence for this one, let's compare them and find out what we're doing, like we did in paper 2, right? But if you end up with a lot of research, well, then it might be more complicated, it might get bigger. And if that happens, I would suggest doing a paragraph on treatment 1, paragraph on treatment 2, and then a concluding paragraph that does the comparison. Any questions so far about this? If you didn't do this before, you're going to need to do it this time in order to make sense of all this, because you're going to drive yourself crazy. And that is to create the matrix, right? Which is, here's your criteria. Right? Put your criteria across the top of the page, and you're going to have your sources over here. Right? And what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to, create this matrix so you can say, all right, here's Jones, right? And Jones found, maybe let's say this is pain, this is range of motion, this is, side effects or something like that. I don't know, whatever your criteria are. Just use whatever ones you want. But essentially what you'll have is you'll be able to show, right, did Jones contribute to pain? What does Jones do, right? And you might want to give a kind of a brief synopsis about, strong study, and then talk about what the outcomes were, give it, maybe a brief synopsis of the movement on the pain scale and what the reliability factors are from statistics and those kind of things, right? Something to validate whether the changes that that occurred were related to the treatment. So essentially, listing out the things that are going to help you make an argument here, right? So that by the time you do this with all of your studies, you can find out that Jones is contributing here, Jones is contributing here, Smith is contributing here, here, and here. So when you do this, now you're going to be able to look at this and you're going to say, all right, for this treatment number 1 over here, right? I'm dealing with treatment number 1. I'm finding all these sources on this. I can be able to say, yeah, either, here's my standard. You might want to put a little star into those that are really meeting your standard and doing a good job, right? And you just kind of, isolate it out so that when you begin to write, you can just look down that column and say, all right, let's have a conversation about this column, right? Here's who is contributing to it. Here's what they're doing. Here's how they're doing it. Here's the strong studies. Here's the weak studies. This is what our evidence base is. And then you pull your matrix for treatment 2, right? And you're going to say, all right, here's all my studies for treatment 2. Here's my criteria. And you're going to be able to hold those 2 pieces of paper up together and say, all right, who's got the stronger argument here? Look at the column A for treatment 1. Look at column A for treatment 2, and kind of eyeball it. Who's got the stronger studies? Who's got the better evidence? So that you can make that decision that one is better than the other. But it's all about correlating the studies, synthesizing this information, breaking it down so that it becomes readable. I don't want to read lists of data, right? Where you end up saying, at week 1 they did this, at week 2 they found this, at week 6 they did this, at 12 months they did this, and then go to, in the other study they did week 1 they did this, right? I mean, how boring. Boil it down. Do they contribute to the standard or not? Do they meet the standard or not? Do they compare to the other treatment in a way that shows that they're better? All right? Use tables, charts, whatever you want to your advantage. You got a lot of data in there, and maybe even set up a table in your paper that does a comparison. Like if you got a lot of data about a bunch of different studies here for, let's say, something like pain, you might want to do, here's a conglomerate, you got 75%, so here's a bunch of data, got this, here's this down here, here's what their scores were, they got 76%, so pretty much the same. So set up tables and charts if you want to compare data. Just be reasonable on how you approach this, right? The whole job is to boil this stuff down to make it understandable for an educated audience to be able to say, look, I've read everything there is to read in my field about this, and this is what I know. The research tells me this. And maintain unity, and maintain coherence, and employ the verb-based writing strategies without any grammatical errors, right? And meet the standards of the AMA. So, as you can see by the syllabus, right, after we talk about this paper, what's today? Today the 19th?
Yeah.
Yes. On Friday, you're going to need to bring your AMA manuals to class. And we're going to start talking about how to build a references page. I'm going to be putting up things on the board and saying, okay, you guys need to go find this information in the manual. You need to tell me what this means, how this, how this operates. How do you produce this type of entry in your references page? How would you, cite this type of information? All right. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks, well, actually probably the next 2 weeks, working through our AMA manuals, trying to figure out how to use the manual to make sure that we play by the rules, right? I mean, the AMA manual is our guide. We're not going to do anything unless the manual tells us to do it. So bring your manuals to class. We're going to start working through some exercises on that day. All right, so I'll give you a little crash course on the basics of AMA on Friday, and then we'll start right into the details. Okay? This issue that I'm talking about, how do we use the research, and how are we using the research to make our argument? This is kind of the whole principle of information literacy, right? We don't go and just summarize sources. We don't just go and point to one source and say, here's our evidence, right? We have to look at evidence in a much broader context, right? We got to pull it all together, and we got to find out what it means as a whole, not just here's a study, here's a study, here's a study. So what we're doing here is kind of just giving you, so you understand from the context of our objectives of the course, right? I mean, unity, coherence, grammar, diction. Now we're into the research component, which is information literacy and the presentation of research, right? So we got to know how to use the research, what we do with it, right? Once we find it, and then how do we present it, which is the AMA, right? So those last two objectives of the course, this is what we're going to be focused on. So now it's it's the first four objectives, adding in now the information literacy and the presentation of research objectives. And once you get this done, you're going to do it all over again for paper 5. All right? It is going to consume a ton of your time, right? You're going to be scrambling to get this done by the deadlines. It's going to be a huge task where you're going to be, dealing with mountains of research, and you're probably going to be coming to me going, I don't know where to stop. I could just keep doing this forever and ever. I could just keep finding more and more research, and I'm going to say, yeah, that's the way it goes, right? So, this is the world that you want to live in. So, okay. I'm telling you that because people tend to put off the process of gathering research and actually writing this paper, and they think they can just kind of wing it in the last week before it's due, right? And that is just a recipe for disaster, because it's going to take you a long time just to conceptualize what all this research means in order to then be able to write about it effectively, okay? So you not only, plus you got to read it, right? And you got to evaluate it. You got to be looking at those details and, looking at the methodologies and, finding those statistics and, looking at what they're accomplishing in that research to make sense of it. So no playing games anymore, right? No shortcuts of reading abstracts and thinking you know what the article talks about, right? I mean, this is holding you accountable. Either you know what you're talking about or you don't. All right, any questions? Do I need to motivate you in any other way to get started on this immediately? Okay, because that paper is due November the 7th. All right, so about 2 weeks. Well, that's right around the corner. Yeah, that's gonna come fast. So, what? Try me a river. Right?
That's really long.
Okay, so, paper 3, this was walk on the beach, right? So if you've got questions,